Life Over Coffee. Conversations for transformation.
Hello everybody, I am Rick Thomas and this is Life Over Coffee. I have a hot topic for you and I think I can communicate it to you in one word, and that one word is submission. The greater context is submission within a marriage. I want to talk about a wife's role to submit to her husband, but I want to talk about it in a fair way, not a one-sided way. And that's why I titled this, Submission is Never the Main Problem in a Marriage. You see, when discussing submission problems in a marriage, we should equally scrutinize the submission and leadership constructs, not one but both. This is not an either-or proposition. For example, a half analysis focuses solely on the man's leadership, or a half analysis focuses solely on the wife's submission. And when you do that, it leaves holes in the reconciliation process. And if your goal is to reconcile or to cooperate with God in the reconciliation of a marriage, you have to focus on both sides, leadership and submission, not just one. You see, this is a one flesh coin that has two sides. Now, typically, when I'm doing this, when I'm helping a couple through leadership submission issues, I start with the man's leadership, since he is the functional head of the home. Now, I'm not suggesting that I neglect the wife's role to submit. In fact, this entire talk here is about a wife's role to submit. But what I'm saying here is that we need to start at the correct starting point. That is vital if the goal is to help a couple work through their problems. Now, I realize that submission is a hot topic within Christianity. It is a scalding hot topic within our culture, but I only want to speak within the Christianity sphere because we're the only people that can truly adhere to the Bible because, well, one, we are illuminated by the Spirit of God, and so we can see these spiritual truths, but we're also empowered by the Spirit of God, and so we have the power to be able to transform. But if we're going to have civil discussions, then we have to refrain from engaging in the two extreme camps that sometimes participate in this debate. What are those two extreme camps? Well, one of those is folks who they find the idea of submission to be repulsive. And we have stories. We have heard those people speak. And when you say the word submission, it is a trigger word to them, and it's just a repulsive notion. Well, if you go across the street and jump in the other ditch, you'll find the authoritarian types, typically Christian men. And their view on this discolors biblical common sense. And so we don't want to find ourselves in those two extreme camps. What we hope to do is to be somewhere in the middle so that we can have ongoing, unending, charitable discussions about how much a wife should submit, which also includes two talking points, not one. A wife's responsibility to submit and a husband's requirement to lead well. Now, let's suppose that a couple is genuinely interested in working through a wife's lack of submission problem in a marriage. And if you have a couple that they're humble and they really want to work through a wife's lack of submission, then be sure that you flip the coin over. And you also discuss, not in a cynical way, you're not even suspicious of the husband's responsibility. You're just being thorough. You're just being comprehensive because you recognize that this is a one flesh covenant. We cannot divide and isolate a wife's submission and a husband's leadership as though one does not affect the other. It is dangerous to only talk about a wife's lack of submission while not giving equal time to the husband's leadership role. And so if the goal is to resolve a legitimate submission problem with humility and courage, we must talk about the entire issue and not half of it. And so that's part of what I want to share with you. But there's also something else that I think is quite important as you are addressing both sides of the problem. Let's say that now you move to the submission aspect of the one flesh covenant. Now, I think it would be instructive for us to have more discernment to recognize that if a wife is not willing to submit, There must be something going on underneath the surface of her submission. Sometimes there is a disproportionate amount of conversation that concerns the wife's outward behavior of not submitting to her husband. Sometimes the temptation could be to force or to mandate or even gaslight that she just submit without addressing potential underlying causes as to why she does not submit. And if we try to get behavioral modification without addressing the heart issues, well, that is an incomplete approach to the problem. And it is unfortunate because many times just mandating submission without addressing the heart can lead to spiritual bondage at best and irreparable physical harm at worst. And so no Christian discipler worth their salt would hang out at the surface of any problem, especially this one. And so it should be evident that if a woman is not submitting to her husband, there is something under the surface of her life that is hindering her. Now, what I want to share with you are 10 possibilities of what might be going on under the surface of her life that is inhibiting her from submitting to her husband. Now, perhaps you can add to this list. This is not an exhaustive list, but my point here is 2. 1, if you're dealing with a marriage problem with leadership and submission, you got to deal with both sides of the coin. I've made that case. And then 2, as you focus on the submission issue, you can't just mandate submission and say you must submit. You have to deal with the heart issue. And so I want to lay out 10 possibilities for your consideration, and I would just appeal to you to take time to consider that maybe you can add to this list, because I want you to be thorough. I want you to be comprehensive as you try to understand what might be going on in the heart of this wife that is impeding her to submit to her husband. Now, you can read this article on our website. It's titled, Submission is Never the Main Problem in Marriage. And so go to lifeovercoffee.com. You can find that article and you can get these 10 things. By the way, at the bottom of all of our articles is a print feature. And so you can print this off into a PDF and then you can mark it up and you can add your own notes. But this would be absolutely essential, because what we don't want to do is to force righteousness on someone when we have not addressed what is going on in their heart. So 10 possibilities. Number 1, in no particular order, of course, she is afraid to submit because of sexual abuse as a child. This happens more than you might imagine. And I don't know how much you have dealt with sexual abuse, but the lingering effect of that kind of abuse, to one degree or another, can last a lifetime, which requires the utmost care from her disciplers, particularly her husband. Sexual abuse is a break. It's many things, but an authoritative person has come into this child's life. Now imagine what you're asking this child to do as she grows up. She is marrying an authority, a man, and she is asked to submit to him. Try to think about how hard that would be. She needs expert care, disciple makers, and her husband will be the primary disciple maker in her life as he gently brings her along as she works through the abuse that happened to her as a child. Imagine trying to mandate submission over this lady when something as tragic and horrific as sexual abuse happened so many years ago. It takes a long time to work through it, and so she needs your utmost care. Number 2, she grew up in a verbally or physically abusive family with no template for biblical submission. Her future husband must know how to create one for her, which he can do through his gentle and courageous example. And so in point number 1, she was just horribly abused as a child, which will make her very fearful of submitting to an authority figure. And then point number 2, she has no template of what submission looks like because she was reared in a home, particularly a father who was verbally or physically abusive to her. This too happens more than you might imagine. Number 3, she struggles with habituated patterns of fear because of fallenness. Now, what I'm talking about here is her Adamic shaping influences. It's not her fault, but an outcome of being born in Adam. Some image bearers struggle more with fear than others. We are totally depraved, but we are uniquely fallen. Those of you who have more than one child, maybe you have a child who's more anxiety-centered. They tend to worry more. They're more introspective, and they take things to heart, and they have more soul noise. Well, if you have a person who comes into the world this way, and they tend to default to fear, worry, and anxiety, again, the husband needs to know how to lead well, or he can complicate her soul. Number 4, she has a tiny soul. And what I'm talking about here is 1 Thessalonians 5:14. It talks about the faint-hearted person, which means small-souled. It's similar to the last point, but except there are folks with feebler capacities, making them susceptible to things that a sturdier-souled woman would never fear. And so you can have a person who comes into the world with an Adamic shaping influence of fear, anxiety, worry. This is their thread that hangs out of their garment. And then you can have another person that has a feebler soul, a small soul. And because of that, they need a different kind of care than a sturdier souled woman who just doesn't struggle that way. Number 5, she does not know what submission looks like or how to do it. If she is similar to how I was reared, then she has no template for being a wife or a mother. It's not that she was physically or verbally abused, as I was talking about earlier, but similar, she just has no template. She didn't grow up within a biblical family, which that is a deficit for anyone after they marry. When I stepped into marriage, and it was like, I have no template whatsoever for what a biblical marriage looks like. I didn't see it, I didn't smell it, I didn't hear it, I didn't touch it or taste it. I had no idea. There was nobody in my world, and I mean nobody. My family, my neighbors, extended family, I have no clue what a biblical template looks like for a husband and wife. And that person stepped into marriage ex nihilo. I had to create one out of nothing, and I did a horrible job at it. And so imagine you're telling a wife to submit, but she has no idea to do what you're asking her to do because she's never seen it before. Therefore, the husband's leadership is absolutely crucial as he's helping her to mature into what a biblical marriage looks like. Number 6, she is a new Christian, a new convert. She's a babe in Christ. She's a novice. Even if she has an excellent desire to do right, to submit. I want to submit. But she is a new, immature Christian. It takes time. And it takes proper mentoring to grow up into Christ-likeness. Maybe you can think about it this way. How long did it take you to become a mature Christian, assuming that you are a mature Christian? It took me forever. Sometimes we can map where we are today over a new convert, a person who hasn't quite got there. Sometimes we forget that it took us 40 years to become as great as we are. And then we meet people that are just 5 years down the road, and we can be impatient with them. Number 6, she's a new Christian. And even an excellent desire to do the right thing takes time and proper mentoring to grow up into Christ-likeness. Number 7, she imbibed feministic egalitarian teaching. It could be a challenge for her to swap faves. What I mean is that feminism is a religion. It's a faith. And it can be hard for her to swap faiths. Her religion was her feminist, and you know that their worldview is rooted deep into the psyche, into the soul. And it can take years for the washing of the word to cleanse her from those fallen perspectives. And maybe the majority of the culture now, the last couple of generations, maybe the last 3 generations, come from feministic egalitarian teaching. That stuff rolls over us so much, so often. Maybe most of it is even imperceptible. It's part of the air that we breathe. And then when you come into a Christian worldview, it's like, wow, this is so different. My faith was rooted in that, and now you're asking me to trust in something else, and I don't know how to do that. Number 7, she imbibed feministic egalitarian teaching. Number 8, she became self-reliant. Self-sufficient people have difficulty relying. And what I mean by that, trusting and submitting to others. Self-sufficient people just have a hard time to do that. Suppose that her dad was a ruthless man. In that case, she learned early not to depend on him, but to depend on herself. What am I saying here? She learned to be self-reliant. I can't trust that authoritarian figure in my life. And so I am going to be my own authority. I'm going to rely on myself. And her ingenuity became the path to freedom. But now her husband is requiring her to trust and follow him, another authority. That has not been her self-reliant experience. And so now she will have to learn to be God-reliant, not self-reliant, which can be a fearful thing for a person who has practiced self-reliance for multiple decades. Number 9, she watched her dad abuse her mother, and she swore it would never happen to her. It's common for a child to jump from one ditch into another. In this case, she fears what might happen to her, so she doubles down on her resistance to authoritarianism. Imagine that this is her worldview, and she comes into marriage this way, and the husband doesn't see it, doesn't realize. It doesn't come up in any of their wonderful dating conversations. It doesn't come up in premarital counseling, which is typically almost useless, if not useless anyway. And so none of this comes up, and then she gets married to a man who is expecting her to submit to him, but she has purposed in her heart for 2.5 decades that that is never going to happen on my watch. And then finally, number 10. Now, what I'm addressing here is that before we mandate that a wife submit to her husband, we need to be smart about this. We need to automatically intuit that there's a reason she won't do this, and it's happening in her heart, and we need to see what is going on in her soul before we gaslight her into submission. Number 10, she's on medication, which keeps her in cycles of erratic behavior. Did you know that the majority of our culture takes medication? In fact, if you take no medication whatsoever, you are a rare bird, because most people do. And by the way, once a person goes down the medication route, finding the right medication will be a continuous process as the body acclimates to the last medication that you take. And I've seen this happen in counseling because a person is on medication. She has cycles of erratic behavior, and it makes it very difficult for her to live a consistent, submitted life to her husband. Now, that's just a short list about the woman who does not submit to her husband. But there is a comparable list about what a husband brings into the marriage that would inhibit her from submitting to his inferior leadership. Without question, he has baggage too that attaches or gloms on to the marriage. We all do. I think about all the problems I brought into our marriage. You know what we do when we date. I mean, we're all baggage handlers. We're all handling our own baggage. But during the dating season, we set our baggage aside. We keep it tucked away, maybe hidden from our dating partner, from our boyfriends and girlfriends. And why talk about baggage? That's such a downer. And dating is so much fun, and so we set our baggage aside. But you can't hide your baggage forever. And then when you get married, the luggage starts coming out. I just had a conversation just a few days ago with a couple that I did premarital with, and they've been married for like 3 years now, and I met with them. We've been meeting with them annually, seems like, since they got married, and I was asking them how are they doing. I said, well, we have some communication problems. I laugh because, I mean, we all know. I mean, we just know. If you've been married more than a half a minute, you know, and you either laugh or cry. And I asked them tongue in cheek, why in the world do you have communication problems? Y'all had just a blissful dating relationship. It was nearly perfect. I'm sure it was like 98% perfect. And if it was 98% perfect in dating and your communication was so wonderful, why are you having communication problems now? It doesn't make sense. And of course, the husband says, well, we're living with each other. We're living with each other now. When you put two sinners in a box and they can't escape, dating relationship allows you to have these breaks from each other. Like every single day you can go away from each other, and so every day is a reboot. Dating is blessed. But then when you stop dating basically and go into marriage, now you are two sinners in an inescapable box. Well, guess what? Your baggage is going to come out one piece at a time, or maybe more than one piece at a time. And that's what we bring into our marriage. And when you mix the baggage of a man with the baggage of a woman, and you pour it into one flesh, you're going to have a season of complexity. And so I gave you a list of 10 things, 10 possibilities, 10 things to think about as to why a woman will not submit to her husband. But remember, you can draw out a comparable list of that man, of why he does not lead well, and then you pour what is appropriate into that one flesh covenant, and there will be a season of complexity. Most of the things, by the way, most of the things that apply to the woman that I shared with you could apply to the man too, making it wise to examine the entire one flesh union, not just mandating a wife's submission. If a wife is not submitting, the problem is more significant than her lack of submission. Count on it. If our only answer is for her to submit, then we've not honored God and we've not served that wife. What we will do is we will cliche her by gaslighting her into behavioral submission without addressing the inner complexities of her soul or whatever complications the husband brings to the marriage. If we go down that road of forced submission without helping them, well, we might as well tie a millstone around the marriage and toss it in the ocean. If our first impulse is to talk about her lack of submission, then it begs the question, do we want to find out why she is not submitting? Do we want to find out what his role in the marriage problems have been? Or is the goal merely to get her to submit? I've titled this, Submission is Never the Main Problem in Marriage. You can read everything that I shared with you by going to lifeovercoffee.com. Now, I'd like to wrap up by just asking a couple of questions. I trust that these will be beneficial for you. Number one, why is it essential to address both sides of the one flesh union when discussing submission problems? Now, I would encourage you to have a conversation about this with someone. Now, if your marriage is at the place, I know every marriage would not be able to take this article, podcast, or video. It would be impossible for them at this point because too much junk has gone under the bridge, or they're just not mature enough But if you could have a conversation with someone, now maybe a wife could talk to a mature woman, a man could talk to a mature man, and you can just address this question: why is it essential to address both sides of the one flesh union when discussing submission problems? Now, I would say that if you are the mentor, if you're the mentoring woman, or if you're the mentoring man, you got to make sure that the person that you are mentoring is not focused so much on their spouse, but they're humbly addressing what is going on in their heart and how they can change first. What I'm saying here is they got to address the log in their eye and not just spend their entire time addressing the speck of their spouse. And so why is it essential to address both sides of the one flesh union when discussing submission problems? Number 2, do you have a wife not submitting to you? Or are you helping a couple like this? If so, will you talk comprehensively about this problem rather than just focusing on the wife? And so, husband, if your wife is not submitting to you, would you take some time to write out or to talk to someone about your leadership and how you lead? Would you talk about some of the inhibitors that prohibit her from submitting? There are hindrances in her heart. And what is your plan to shepherd her out of those hindrances so that she can be free to submit to you? Number 3, what are some of the complicating factors in the wife that hinder her from submitting? And then question number 4, what are some of the complicating factors in the husband that hinder him from leading well? And so you want to address both of those. We want to be careful. A woman can be harsh and unkind by talking about his leadership in an uncharitable way without addressing what's going on in his heart. And a man can be harsh and unkind by talking about her lack of submission without addressing what's going on in her heart. Now, finally, number 5, as you address the historical shaping influences and the current heart issues, what is your practical plan to help them resolve the past, find peace in the present, and work toward a restorative future? Now, that's not an answer that you will just be able to give in 10 seconds or less. You'll have to spend some time reflecting before the Lord and just asking Him to help you, to give you insight. What has happened in their past that has shaped them in such a way that it's like a stronghold, it's an anchor point that's keeping them tied to their past. And so how can they resolve the past so they can find peace in the present tense, and then knowing that these things are going to creep back up all along, you need to work toward a practical plan for a restorative future. And so you can read this. The main problem is submission is never the main problem in marriage. All of these questions, those 10 underlying heart issues, and you're welcome to share this with anyone. And for those of you who are providing soul care, it is essential that you grasp this so that we become gentle, courageous restorers with people who are caught in lifelong bondage to sin. Now, if you want to grow in knowing how to do these things, this is what we teach in our mastermind program. We have an all-online course where anyone can come. It's all online. You can do it at your coffee shop. You can do it at your kitchen table. But you can learn to do the work of discipleship. And we do training in 3 areas. Having a theological foundation is critical. And then understanding sanctification theory. And then number 3 is the practicum, where we apply theology and sanctification in real-world context so that you can grow in doing the work of discipleship. The 5 areas that we address in the student's life are the person's character, the person's capacity, how much do they have, how high is their ceiling, because some people will come into our training and they will make good friends for the rest of their lives. Other people will be wonderful disciple makers. And then you have a very few people, and this is a small number of people, who have the capacity to actually be formalized biblical counselors. Some of them will land at the informal counseling level, and it's fine. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we are in the spot that God has made us to be. What we don't want is mismatches where a person thinks that they are something that they are not, and therefore they're not qualified to meet this person that they are counseling. That is a mismatch, and you will end up hurting that individual. And so we address the student's character, their capacity, their competence, their courage, and compassion. Those are the 5 elements as they go through our mastermind program. Now, we have a learning management system, an introduction LMS, and you can get on it, and it will walk through all of these things. It will tell you virtually everything that you would want to know about our mastermind program. That is a free LMS that you can just go through step by step. There is a ton of information in that LMS, but if it doesn't answer all of your questions, then we would love for you to just hit the contact button in the footer of our website and say, hey, I got more questions about the mastermind program. I'm interested in it. So first, go through the LMS, and if you have any questions left, please ask. And if this is a program that you think would fit with you at this season of life, we would love for you to take a look at it and potentially jump into it, and that would be fantastic. Again, the title of this, Submission is Never the Main Problem in Marriage. Thank you so much, and God bless.
Thanks for joining us. Learn more and get access to other resources at lifeovercoffee.com.